Well, people, this is an interesting case we have here. One of the year's most highly anticipated games was released about a week ago, and I spent pretty much that whole week playing the entire thing. And what I found was not the game I expected to find. Instead, I found a bewildering yet competent game that defies all game-making logic. I am, of course, talking about Final Fantasy XVI. And before we really get started, I'll say this. I've seen some stuff here and there of what people are saying about this game, some of it accurate, some of it inaccurate. I've seen the review scores and whatnot, but I don't see the exact truth, said plainly and in a way that is easy to understand. Because at the end of the day, everything about this game, both good and bad, isn't hard to understand why it is good or bad. And although video games and just art and entertainment in general are subjective mediums, this game feels like it has a lot of objectively correct answers when it comes to what's good, what's bad, and the game score altogether. So here I am, to relay the truth, albeit a subjective truth, but one that I've never felt more confident in. Now, let's talk about Final Fantasy XVI. What's good about it, what's bad about it, and what's just an indifferent fact. Oh, and remember to like and maybe even subscribe if you enjoy. Alright, here we go. Okay, so let's start off with one of those indifferent facts I mentioned. This is not an RPG. It just isn't, and that's fine. I don't see anything wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with a change of pace after 16 mainline titles. But the fact is that this is not an RPG. It's not even an action RPG. Calling this game an RPG of any kind would inflate the definition of an RPG to such expansive parameters that we'd be calling every single game to ever exist an RPG. So let's not do that. This is an action game through and through. It just has a couple of RPG mechanics bolted onto it, and not even bolted on well. This game is as much of an RPG as God of War 2018 was, and not even as much of an RPG as God of War Ragnarok. And in case you didn't know, God of War Ragnarok is not an RPG. Okay, so I just wanted to get that cleared up. Yes, this game is called Final Fantasy, but it is not an RPG. It is a narrative action game. And honestly, that shouldn't be a problem to people because the Final Fantasy series, in terms of just being RPGs, are some of the most restrictive and linear games in the genre and really aren't what you want to hold up as what it means to be an RPG. Because think about what typically defines a role-playing game. They're typically measured, at least in an RPG capacity, by their abundance of choice. Something that the Final Fantasy games I've played anyway don't really have. There's never a lot of choice in dialogue or how to play or how to progress. The game is just the game. And they're really only RPGs because what? Some turn-based combat and numbers popping off of people? Don't get me wrong, the games aren't bad typically. They just aren't the pinnacle of what RPG means. So it doesn't surprise me that Final Fantasy XVI as an action game has nearly shed the facade entirely. Now allow me to move into something positive about this action game. That would be the bulk of the action that you partake in. Most of the time, the combat gameplay is good, and at times, it becomes great, and on very rare occasion, it's downright outstanding, especially when you've gained a lot of abilities to be chained in succession, and when there are big, less stun-lockable enemies around. Another positive thing about this game is its immediate narrative presentation, the parts of it that hit you and become apparent as soon as you start the game. The tone, the dialogue, the voice work is all stellar. This is very easily the best dialogue I've ever heard in a Final Fantasy. For once, the over-the-top, batshit crazy storyline of a Final Fantasy game isn't being undercut by this blanket of borderline comedic melodramatic delivery. And for that, I am thankful. It's quite a feat that helps to engross you in the story of the game even when it gets a little tough to understand. And the story itself isn't bad. No spoilers, but it does have its moments, even a touch of not so subtle but no less effective religious commentary, and probably not in the way that you're thinking right now. However, Final Fantasy XVI does hang its hat on its narrative and its combat, but the narrative more so. And so, you might be asking, well, what else is there? If you've got good narrative and you got good combat, what else could there be? Well, there's everything that surrounds those things. They completely neglect the fundamentals. In focusing so much on the meal they were serving us, they forgot to give us a table. Allow me to be more clear. Folks, what we have here is a pacing issue. We have a game that forgets all too often and for all too long that it is a video game. And Final Fantasy commits this sin in such a way that would make Naughty Dog games look gameplay focused. I'm not kidding when I say I think this is the worst pacing I've ever experienced in a video game. Assuming you don't skip any cutscenes or main quest dialogue because you actually want to know what's going on, by the end of things, you will have spent dramatically more time just sitting there than actually playing the game. I am not joking. There are plenty of games with long cutscenes or lots of cutscenes, but none paced so horribly. The cutscenes and gameplay of Final Fantasy XVI are not evenly distributed. They aren't even just a tad off kilter in favor of the narrative. The scales are woefully imbalanced. For example, let's take a game like Death Stranding, another game with a lot of long cutscenes. Death Stranding opens up with a literal movie's worth of cutscenes. I'm not even joking. It's like an hour and a half to 2 hours. But once they finally give you fucking control, you're stuck in pure gameplay for at least 3 hours, and you couldn't find a cutscene if you wanted to. There's some sort of idea of pacing going on. But Final Fantasy XVI, on the other hand, I am not joking, gives you about 15 to 20 minutes of gameplay for every fucking hour of cutscenes and dialogue. And that's the thing, you get out of cutscenes and you're like, great, time to play. But no, people just start talking to you and they won't fucking shut up. And if this were a real life RPG like Fallout or Cyberpunk or Disco Elysium or some shit where you make decisions and reply to dialogue, then all this talking would be fine because I am an active participant. It's part of the gameplay. But in the case of Final Fantasy XVI, when people are talking, it just means that I'm not playing the game. And hell, the pacing issues even extend to when you have control of Clive, because he runs with all the speed of a snail in slow motion. I am not kidding when I say that it is literally faster to fast travel to anywhere from where you're standing than to walk 50 meters. Clive is that fucking slow. It's unbelievable. Even the combat is dampened a bit by horrible pacing. You have just one and then finally two abilities for entirely too long. It's crazy. I cannot for the life of me think of a game with worse pacing than this. But hold on, everyone. Our woes are not over. We have to talk about the side quest. And you're gonna think I'm exaggerating because of what I just said about the pacing, but these are honestly some of the worst side quests I've ever had the displeasure of experiencing in my whole fucking life. If they aren't the absolute worst, they've gotta be top 5, maybe top 3. Listen, take what I said about the pacing into account when I tell you that there are side quests in this game that are literally all dialogue and cutscenes. In a game where you don't make character decisions, there are missions where people only talk. What the fuck is the thinking? And the other missions aren't any better. They're all mostly just dialogue, and you'll probably have to do one measly fight with enemies that can be easily stun-locked. And then bada bing, it's mission complete. If you're really lucky, you might even get 2 fights between the dialogue. Oh, happy day. It's like at first you're fine with being told a fairly compelling story between the cool, sleek, well-executed gameplay that you're constantly chomping at the bit to get more of, but then you're just waiting for so long that the tiny little morsel of combat that you get, it's barely enough. But there is a saving grace to the shit side content, and while it might not fully satiate your gameplay hunger, it almost single-handedly brings the game up to snuff, and that is the bounty board. It's exactly what it sounds like. Strong monsters will appear somewhere and you look at the bounty board and track them down and take on what are easily the most fun and challenging fights in the game. And the challenge is likely gonna be what you want because the game is a little too easy. I played for 50 hours and I only died once because I got caught with a one-hit kill move. But of course, because of the story stuff, playing 50 hours in this game actually means I only played 20 or whatever, but you know. Point is, the bounties are fun. Nothing else even holds a candle. Sometimes you even have to do a little bit of detective work because the bounty board won't give you a specific area to look. Instead, you have to read some sort of incident description and kinda use the lore clues to find out where the target is. It's pretty cool. Honestly, this could have just been all of the side missions. Because while sometimes the side missions add some nice little narrative flavor or world building, nearly 100% of the time, it's far too long-winded and completely devoid of a need for the player at all. And I did every single side quest, bounty, everything you could do in the first playthrough. I say in the first playthrough because the New Game Plus unlocks some new equipment and content stuff. But when I got prompted to play New Game Plus, I thought, no thanks, once was quite enough. It's like being at an amusement park and waiting in a line that goes out the park to get on a ride. And once you finally get on, you're like, holy shit, that was fucking amazing and fun and cool, oh my god. And then someone goes, wanna get in line again? Like, no man, no thank you, what the fuck? You've got a cool thing and all, but I'm not doing that again. But yeah, at the end of the day, you have good combat, a good narrative with outstanding production value and a fantastic presentation, only to be yanked back down to earth by the absolute worst pacing I've ever witnessed in a game and a self-indulgent, pitiful excuse for side content, turning a game that should have been God's gift to gaming into a game that instead barely breaks into the category of just being good. If I had to put a number on it, I'd say it's a weak 7 out of 10, leaning a lot closer to 6.5 than 7.5. And I'll tell you what, weak 7 is the canonical score for this game. This is the truth. No one's gonna give it to you straighter than this. I have never felt more confident in an opinion than saying that this game, Final Fantasy XVI, is a weak 7 out of 10. If you are to ever take anything I say to heart, let it be this. And when Game of the Year time comes around, I probably shouldn't see this game, not in a year where so much great shit has come out. This is not cutting the mustard in 2023. But alright, I think I'm done. I hope you enjoyed. Like the vid if you did, and please subscribe, it means a lot. I'd tell you to leave an opinion in the comments, but in this one specific case, I have the correct opinion, so don't even bother. Okay, until next time, I am Waifu Belector. I am just a normal guy. I like hentai, and this entire video was just a Final Fantasy XVI cutscene. Goodbye.